Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of the Dylbozer's Den. It is me, the Dylbozer, and today we're going to be discussing the newest record from Yonkers, New York's own Malignancy and their record Discontinued, out through Willowtip Records. So, Yonkers, New York, also the hometown of ECW hardcore legend Tommy Dreamer. I first became aware of Malignancy through probably the way a lot of people got into Malignancy, which is through Trevor Stannard of the Black Dahlia Murder. He was a walking billboard for everything extreme metal, and I'm pretty certain I've seen live shots and or live footage of him in a Malignancy t-shirt throughout the years. So I saw the title, was already kind of pulled into it of like, this looks really interesting and fucked up. I have to check it out. You know, I kind of compare Malignancy to bands such as Defeated Sanity or Wormed as kind of the front runners of this style of music. I am obviously leaving a lot of names out that are also needed due credit for this style of music. Your Dying Fetuses, Your Suffocations, which we will dig in a little bit more. But Malignancy, this is their first actual full length of new material since 2012's Eugenics. They had a re-recording of their 1999 debut record, Intrauterine Cannibalism, in 2019. And that technically is a record. It was a re-recording, but it's not newer material. So it's been about 12 years since we had any new material from the band. And hell, what a fucking record did we get with this thing. I have been awaiting this thing for quite some time just because of the players involved with this band throughout different periods of time. But let's get into that lineup a little bit. Returning members, Danny Nelson, who is on vocals. He's also the lone original member of the band. Ron Kognick on guitar. Mike Heller on drums. Mike Heller, for those that are in the know, may already know. But for those who didn't know, he spent some time in Fear Factory in their later years. He's also currently in a project called Black Hole Deity, who has just recently released a full-length record. And he's also in new wave of British heavy metal stalwarts Raven. But me being a bass player, I have to talk about the bass lineup on this album. The aforementioned Defeated Sanity is represented yet again. Jacob Schmidt, who is not necessarily in the band, but he recorded all the bass for this album, and he is all over it, and we will dig into that. Their current bass player is Alex Weber, who has yet to record with the band, but has been in the band since 2020. He has been in a multitude of projects, currently of Exist, which is his own band, who put out a great record through Prosthetic Records earlier this year. He's done live bass for technical death metal legends at this point, Obscura, who is a band that's kind of taken what Necrophages did and, in my opinion, have perfected it and made it a little bit better. But he's also filled in live for Defeated Sanity for periods of time when Jacob couldn't tour. I believe that was in 2017-ish. The recording of this project was a little bit interesting. It was recorded in multiple different studios. It seems like maybe these guys were all split apart. The US, this could have been recorded during the pandemic period, I believe, or maybe when we had to have certain restrictions placed for periods of time. The vocals recorded by Mike Yusufer at Aural Assault Studio. Mike was also on a project called Demolition Hammer, which I don't know enough about, but I have seen the name, I've read the name many, many times, and I believe Ron, the guitar player of Malignancy, also did some time in Demolition Hammer as well. Guitars were recorded by Tom Tolada at Coney Productions. You know, it makes me think these guys were probably recording in New York with a name like that, but I could very well be wrong. Drums and bass were recorded at Heaven and Heller Studios. I'm assuming that's a studio owned by Mike Heller, or it's his home. Jacob lives somewhere over on the West Coast based off of the Cali Death podcast and an old episode that they did. Shout out those dudes. Those dudes have helped me a lot with a lot of the bands that I'm into now. I believe Jacob probably recorded on his own, or maybe he recorded with Mike. If so, that makes a lot of sense because the rhythm section on this record is locked the fuck in and is kind of doing its own thing with it all somehow feeling like it's part of the record. Let's take a look at this thing on our left here. I mean, it's in photo, great artwork, kind of reminiscent of brutal death metal bands. It's a little bit more tame in that, but it also brings in some old school vibes with a throwback to the Intrauterine Cannibalism record. It's kind of got that fetus and the pod thing that's there. But Tony Cosgrove did this, and Tony Cosgrove also did the artwork for a project that Jacob Schmidt is currently in or was in called Methorama, and their album Pipe Dreams Through the Alley. Really cool, brutal death metal record. I got a chance to listen to it a few months back. So you've got 9 songs on this record at roughly about 33 minutes. So you can listen to this thing about twice in an hour. I've gone on runs and listened to the full record, and it's a lot to dig into. What a fucking record. This band is prone to write what sounds like the never-ending riff, and with a 12-year gap, there's no fucking different. This album does feel like a little bit more accessible than maybe Eugenics was or anything that's came before it, without it being a completely foreign thing. The production is fantastic. Like I mentioned before, the bass and drums are locked in. The guitars are fucking ridiculous. Ron does a great job. It's almost like he goes above and beyond to make things as difficult as he possibly can for he himself to play live. But man, is it a fucking great performance on this record. You start out with a track like Existential Dread, and it's fast. There's pinch harmonics all over it. What am I fucking talking about? There's pinch harmonics all over this fucking record. A song like Existential Dread that kicks the record right off, just a barrage of riffs, really kicking in with that rhythm section, really honing in that not only the guitars are doing their own thing, but it feels like the rhythm section's doing their own thing. But in reality, they're so locked in, it sounds like two separate instruments in their own right. There's a big groove in this track that kicks in about 2 minutes, 43 seconds. And it just feels like nothing is played the same all the way through the song. There's always a different pinch harmonic or a different bend or a different slide or a different, strum or a different chug or something. But everything feels like a motif. You go right into Binary Paradigm. Straightforward intro grooves. There's grooves all over this record to break up just the barrage of this technicality and this just intense, abrasive music. Like I mentioned, Binary Paradigms, full of fucking grooves. Opposition Defiance, which is later in the album, which has these almost sludge-style groovy riffs. And you've got like this massive groove in Biological Absurdity, which is the last track on the record. And that groove in particular lasts for about 2.5 seconds. And then it never returns. And that's something I noticed on this record is you better enjoy the parts when you hear them and really hone in on them, because they don't really return to them all the time. But man, is it fucking cool. You get all of these different stylistic choices all throughout these songs. I mean, it's all fucking death metal. You go into a song like Irradiated Miscreation, where I mentioned, like, if you blink, you'll miss it. The bass is really cutting through on this track. There's even some layered vocals, the bear and snake thing we've referred to as before on this track. Again, more grooves to break up the tech and the brutality of this stuff, to add some just good mosh parts in there. You don't get a whole lot of time with them, but man, when they're there, they really are impactful, which is such a great form of songwriting, to where you've got this just barrage of blasting and wild fucking drums and guitars and bass going everywhere, and you slow down and you groove for just a few seconds. It's a breather, but it's also so much more impactful when you do that. Purity of Purpose, which is one of the singles for the record, this thing is just full of hooks. The intro riff is great. Makes me think of Suffocation, something off like Effigy of the Forgotten or any of those early records like that. On this album as a whole, I get a very Cattle Decapitation vibe. So maybe something off the Karma, Bloody Karma or the Harvest Floor era. But that could be said about a lot of brutal death metal bands. And I'm not even saying that this band sounds like Cattle Decapitation, but I get a vibe because those two albums are so fucking wild and there's so many different parts to those songs. And it's just like, if you blink, you'll miss them. As I said before, this album reminds me of that styling. I would say Purity of Purpose is probably the more traditionally structured song. It seems like the obvious choice for a single in brutal death metal. Danny does a really good job with these fucking vocals. He does kind of two different sounds, but those two sounds are done so well and they blend together so well. It's just kind of a calling card. And I fucking love it. I don't want to miss highlighting that. So let's get to probably the most interesting track to me on this record, which is Ancillary Biorhythms. It opens up with a sample from a Netflix series called Altered Carbon, which I'm not familiar with, but it's fucking bleak. So check that shit out. But it's just a true brutal death metal track. You've got this wild, crazy bass tapping going on this. Jacob Schmidt's performance on this record is fucking great. I feel like his role in Defeated Sanity is a little bit more of holding the ground and, just locking in with the drums on there, because the drums are always wild, guitars are always wild. Maybe they're a little bit more jazzy in a sense, so he's got to hold the fort down. He cuts through in little bits in there on those records. His presence is definitely felt, but this record is like, he's up front, he's in the mix, you can hear him, and he is fucking stepping out all over this shit. Haunted Symmetry definitely makes me think of Origin, maybe some of their antithesis material. This is another track that, again, and that's to say all of these songs have pinch harmonics all over it. That's a Malignancy thing. There's even jokes about them playing live that you're going to hear just some crazy fucking pinch harmonics all over it. But man, this song would challenge Zach fucking Wild. You get to a track like Decomposed Divinity, which has a groove in it, but it is absolutely a Malignancy groove. It is 100% a crazy Malignancy groove. That is the only way to describe it. They have their own kind of slam and their own kind of stomp to them. There's been so many great fucking records this year. And to get something like this that's like 33 minutes long and fucking listen to it 3 times in an hour and a half, that's less time than some of the fucking movies that are coming out today. Goddamn, Endgame was like 16 hours long, and it's not as good as this record. It's not. 12 years was way too long to go without a record release from these guys. I'm glad these guys are back. I would love to see them on tour, whatever touring they're doing. Great fucking band. Check their back catalog out. Discontinued. Eat shit if you don't like it, but have fun with it. Thanks, guys.